Hello, and welcome to Film Slam Stream's post-film conversation for Still Here. My name is Eric Siler, and I'm an instructor of film, media arts, and communications, as well as moderator for this conversation. We're very pleased to be joined by the director of Still Here, Mariah Barrera. Mariah is a Mexican-American filmmaker and writer who was born and raised in Michigan. She is a part-time New York City resident and is also a student at Columbia University in New York. Her films aim to amplify themes of social justice and equity and draws on her family experiences in the urban Midwest. So in this film you saw here, definitely hit that point about how Mariah expresses herself through art. Hello, Mariah, and welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited and grateful to be here and to be able to talk about this film with you all.
I'm so glad too that you're here as well too. But you have a story yourself too. You're at an Ivy League school. You have uncles that were incarcerated, and you saw that kind of life, even seeing your father go through that, and that's part of your childhood. Tell us a little bit how you came from an environment like that to where you are now.
I grew up around a lot of gang violence. I grew up with incarceration being a very normal part of my life, whether it was uncles, other family members, family friends. Um, these things were just the norm to me, and I never really imagined a world outside of that. But I used to wonder, like, am I the only child who kind of is raised in these environments? Am I the only one? And at about like 10 years old, my family moved like 2 hours away from Saginaw to a city called Grand Rapids. We very much stayed connected because all of our family lives in Saginaw. But it was me moving and getting involved with an organization that really looks at kids like me and says there are vital and necessary storytelling skills that we can teach you through just using your cell phone. You don't need fancy equipment, you don't need a camera, you don't need a lot of money. You have an important story, and we can teach you how to tell it with just something that you keep in your pocket. This organization is called the Mosaic Film Experience, and I credit them with kind of changing my trajectory and starting to teach me that there is a future and a life possible for me outside of where I may come from and the adversity and the difficulties I faced throughout my entire life, because those things didn't necessarily end when I moved to Grand Rapids. They just became a little bit more distanced. Um, and so through working with them, I developed a love for filmmaking, and that passion for filmmaking and art is really what led me on a path to just, I do want to go to college. I do want to work hard in school. I do want to make films. And so it's through their support and also kind of being able to have that path diverge a bit that I ended up at a school like Columbia and Ivy League. And to this day, it's still hard to be like, how did I make it there? Why me? Um, and definitely while I'm there, I realized there aren't a lot of students like me. I'm very much not the norm. And while that was a bit scary and discouraging at first, when I first came to the school with people who live in a completely different world, this is like these experiences that I grew up with are things they only see on movies, if at that. And, at first it was discouraging and it was scary, but the more, my time went on there, the years I spent there, I began to realize like that's my power, my story and where I come from. That's my motivation, that's my power, and that's what separate not just separates me, but that's what actually um makes me stand out. And I offer a voice in discussions that no one else at that school really is going to give. And while I felt like there weren't people like me there, I'm just going to give this quick anecdote. My second year there, I took a class called Incarcerated Yet Inspired. And that was the class that taught me that there are a few people like me and at that school. And there are people who care about the things, the experiences that I've gone through. There's a way I can find community. And so, even though I went to a school where, there's no reason why someone who grew up like me should end up there. There's tiny little moments that I've had there, including that class where, I was reminded you absolutely have a space and a place and a voice here. Your voice is valuable, your experience is valuable, and you're not just getting something from the school. You're not going here to just be like I go to an Ivy League school, I got this degree, but you're actually there to contribute something. You're there to contribute a different viewpoint, a different experience, and you just have to trust that that's going to impact someone around you, and they'll carry, your experience you tell them about through their life in some way. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And no one could tell the story like you can tell it. I know you have met friends, met other people who are talented or intelligent like you are, and they might, get wind of your background in life. Hey, I want to do this film, and they come and live with you and try to get incorporated, but it's nothing like growing up with this and passionate about it. Tell me, when did you first decide to do a film about your family?
Yeah, so this actually, um, it was after my senior year of high school, the summer between, graduating high school and starting my first year at Columbia. It was during COVID-19. So it was during the pandemic. So I wasn't going to school virtually. I was here at home. Um, and, during the summer of 2020, there were a lot of amplified conversations around the criminal justice system through Black Lives Matter. And it's not like these conversations were new. It's just for the first time, people wanted to, they were becoming a lot more amplified. They're things we've been talking about in our communities for a long time, but now they were getting like a national platform in a lot of ways. And, I noticed while, things were going on that summer, while I was reading articles on social media, watching the news, both activists and, critics, whatever it may be alike, were using the word prisoners. Um, just a very casual way, like prisoners and statistics and prisoners. And I think for the first time that sparked something in me of like, hold up, why is this making you upset, Mariah? And, the more I thought about it, I was like, well, because they're talking about my uncles, they're talking about my family. I know they're not just prisoners. They're my uncles who I love dearly. They're someone's brother, they're someone's sister, someone's mom, someone's dad, whatever that may be. They're more than just this label. Um, and you know what? And when I get that feeling of like something's making me upset at that point, it was like make a film about it. That's the best way you can take these feelings and explain them to someone else is through film. And so that's when I first got the idea. And um, at that point when I made it, both of my uncles were still incarcerated. And my only entryway into telling the story is through my dad. So growing up, my dad, I witnessed him kind of becoming a father figure to my uncles, my cousins, my uncle's children. I witnessed how, he was sending them money, he was writing them letters, he was taking care of things for them while they were incarcerated. Um, and so that's kind of where the idea of My Brother's Keeper came from. I thought I was just going to make a normal documentary. So I had him sit down, set up a camera in front of the backdrop, and recorded like 2 hours of footage. And then I realized while watching the footage back, this isn't going to be a normal documentary. I focused on this little part where he told me, like, there was this one time um someone didn't come home. I was sitting on the curb waiting, and he said, that's what it felt like. That's what it's felt like. That one line there just touched me so much, and I was like, I'm gonna make the whole film around it. So I made My Brother's Keeper, a 4-minute short film, which is the beginning of Still Here, this beginning chapter of Still Here. I made that, and then I was able to submit it to things. I got some awards. I was able to get funding to actually make a longer short films. And by the time I got funding, both of my uncles were out of prison. And so now I was like, okay, all three of them are here. Now this story that started as My Brother's Keeper is gonna become a full, complete narrative. They all experienced similar things, but they experienced it in such a different way, depending on if they were the oldest brother, the brother who wasn't incarcerated, the brother who was the baby brother. And so that's where Still Here came from. It came from, okay, now everyone's here. There's still more to be said. They still all have their own individual stories. And so now it's time to really make it and to figure this out and complete the narrative that I started.
So how did your uncles feel about you doing a film about, their life? Because when you're incarcerated, you may want to forget about that life, but now it's being put on full blast. What was their reaction?
Yeah, so we had a lot of conversations before, I made the film about my dad and his experience. And, when it came time to like, okay, I want to make this bigger, I talked to both of them about it. We had a lot of conversations and discussions before any filming even occurred. Um, just talking through it with them. And, I think the biggest thing is what we collectively realized is there's a lot of questions that we had to ask to make this film that, like, if we didn't make this film, no one else was going to ask them. Like, our family was not going to talk about it. We were gonna push it away. And, there's a lot of trauma and a lot of hard things that, not just because of incarceration, but because of our culture, being Mexican, being men, the stigma around, getting into emotional conversations or talking openly about trauma. And I think, as we had these conversations and as they agreed to do the film in the way that I told them that, it's not for anything else other than to tell your guys' stories. Um, I think for them, it was naturally like empowering in some ways for our family to have these hard conversations. I grew up only knowing my uncles through phone calls. I knew their voices. I knew the cards that they sent me home for holidays. Um, I had a relationship with them and I loved them, but it was, through phone calls and not really even knowing what they looked like sometimes. And yeah, I think that me being able to make this film actually was another avenue for our personal relationship to grow, for me to learn who my uncles are. It wasn't just about the experience of incarceration, it was the time we spent together making this film, growing closer to each other. Um, I think that quickly we realized the positives that were coming out of it. And although it was hard to work through, I feel like otherwise maybe my family would have never talked about it. Maybe we would have never asked them how it was for them, what their childhood was like, what led them um, on this path. And I think that while it was difficult for them and sometimes challenging for me as their niece and their daughter, it was a necessary conversation our family needed to even start healing from the trauma.
So when you sat down and talked with them, I know you mentioned a moment ago you did, you set up the camera, you talked to them, but the way you decided to make this into a film, you did it through like poetry, maybe rap or whatever you want to call it, in that type of way. How did you come up with the idea to express the film in this manner?
Yeah, so I think that for I didn't want the film to talk about these topics in a straightforward way. I didn't feel like that would just be conducive to the story in some ways because, you know, I wanted people to hear it in a different way than they've heard it before. I wanted them to have to think a little bit harder about, what is this person actually saying? And so again, my uncles, throughout their lives, they've done rap music and things like that. They're natural writers, they're natural poets. And so that felt very seamless to introduce. I think what really hammered it in for me is like some of the things that, when I asked them, I said, we're going to do a voiceover because that's what I did with my dad. And that came naturally. I want you to write one of my uncles, they wrote out a whole paragraph of their experience kind of using spoken word. My other uncle, we did an interview and I picked out some really poetic parts from it that I wanted them to elaborate on. And we went back and forth with it. They'd send me a piece of their writing. I'd kind of give them my ideas, send it back to them. They'd tweak it back and forth until we got something that felt natural. Um, I think that the biggest thing is that it came naturally to us to do it poetically. And also, I didn't want to talk about it with just facts and figures and I'm telling you directly. I wanted those who watch to think a little bit harder about it. And sometimes we don't have the words to explain such harsh feelings. Sometimes it is easier for us to do it through metaphor, through abstract images and through biblical allusions. Um, I think it was really just like what would be best for us to tell it using the things we already have inside of us and also the things we don't know how to say. What's the best way that we can say it?
Yes. So, with that, well, tell me this: what do your uncles think of the film now? And I know they must, and your father, I know they must be proud of you, must be beaming. Do they want you to do more? What's been their response?
Yes, it's interesting because like, Yeah, definitely that comment of, like, we need to make a full movie, like, even if it's not a documentary, but really detailing the ins and the outs of our lives. That's been a comment that's been made so many times about now we need a bigger one, even from family members, people in Saginaw who know my family. It's like, "When's the rest? When's there's more?" And, I just wanna talk about the moment when, it was its film festival premiere in New York City, and I remember telling my uncles, even though it was probably a wild goal when we were shooting it with, just me doing everything in our small budget, I told them, "I'm going to get you guys a New York City premiere." Like, I don't know how, but we're gonna get a New York City premiere, and I had my key festivals in my head that I was like, I want you 3 to come to New York to have this moment, to see your story on a screen in a city, that we used to talk about or have only seen on TV. It's like a dream, New York City, and I remember telling them that, like, a whole year and a half while we were shooting, before, its premiere, and, things didn't happen exactly how I wanted to, but they happened even better. We did get the New York premiere at a festival that, again, was an even better alignment than the one I was hoping for, planning for. In that moment, all of my uncles, or my 2 uncles and my father were there, my whole family was there. They were able to go into this theater, take pictures in front of backdrops, have people talk to them afterwards. I think really the reception immediately was joy and excitement and emotion. Our whole role, my entire family was crying during that premiere because I think it was really just like, look how far we've come. None of us would have ever thought our stories would be important enough or timely enough to be shown on a screen for people in the city. And so, um, the immediate reaction was just happiness. They didn't have to be like, "I loved the film, Mariah." They showed it, and so I think that that was, like, just in that moment when we walked out of the theater, just seeing the tears, but also the smiles was, like, just the most fulfilling feeling. I gave them what I promised them, which was, "You're gonna be able to watch your film on a big screen in New York City," and, after that, everything else was a bonus. That was, the moment I wanted them 3 to have just to be able to see their film, and have other people see it as well.
Yeah, Mariah, I don't know if you realize the impact that you've had on your family. I know they told you things and there are things that go and said impact on people who see this because, there's statistics that show that, once you're incarcerated, chances are there's a high chance of you being reincarcerated again. Um, but by you creating this art and having this art out there, that kind of shows, people who have been incarcerated or your family where they've been.
Mhm.
And it's just a reminder, look, just press forward and the whole theme of love can help, someone do well. So you've had a tremendous impact on people.
Thank you so much. That is
Yeah. And one thing I just want to read is like and just to impact, I'm just going to read this. You say in the film, you see the ugly truth is that incarceration steals, kills, and destroys, steals boys before they have a chance to become men, kills futures before they can even take flight, destroys family like it almost did mine. So just, just those words, kills, steals, and destroys. It's just so poetic. It just reaches people. So I just think it's just really amazing piece of work. And I hope other people see that as well too.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, and that line is actually one of my most favorite in the whole film, so to hear that that resonated with you, um, really means a lot to me because I think that perfectly, encapsulates this idea of what incarceration could have did to my family, but it didn't prevail, and, with this film, I hope other people can understand that there is hope on the other side of it and that, for those who don't directly experience it, that they have a direct hand, in being able to advocate for those who have experience or to at least have, empathy and understanding for these experiences and, to be able to correct conversations, correct statistics, correct, stigmas that they see within their own lives and, in the lives of those around them.
Yeah. I know we're out of time. I'm sorry, Gabby. I'm just gonna be a couple more minutes. I know we're going over, but uh, as a filmmaker and artist, we're our worst critics. What is something that you wish you had done after seeing this film? If you had more time, you says I should have done that shot better, found more things, or done something like that, or you just felt like it was perfect.
So I definitely think that the more time that has passed, the more times I've watched it, I am my worst critic at screenings. It's hard to even watch it, even though, I'm so proud of it. I can't help but look down sometimes because I know there's always going to be, I could have moved the camera an inch this way. I could have framed them this way. I could have edited that this way, maybe made that shot longer. There's always going to be something like that. But the thing I really remind myself and that I kind of like carry me through those ideas is, I made that film like over a year ago, a little over a year ago. And I think that the biggest thing is I made that film the exact way I needed to make it for that time, who I was, how I viewed the world, how I viewed my story. Um, I can't blame how that Mariah felt like was the best way to tell that story. And so, I can think from Mariah now, of course, there's things I would do differently. Maybe I would have changed that, but ultimately, it wouldn't be the same story. Um, and me now would of course for any film I make, if I did it now, I'd make it slightly differently because I'm different, but I made it for the Mariah at that time, the best way that I could have. And so in that regard, I don't have any regrets. I'm happy that it can serve as a time capsule of who I was as an artist, how I viewed my story, and yeah, I'm glad I can have that as a signifier of that specific time and would never change it.
Great. What's next for you? I know you mentioned about trying to make this into the full documentary. Is that what's next for you, or are you working on something else?
So I'm currently working on another short but potential feature documentary that's actually about my story, and about, my personal memories from my childhood growing up in this kind of hyper vigilant um, environment of gang violence, gun violence, incarceration. And so I'm currently working on that with the fellowship that helped me make Still Here. And it's kind of like in its development phases right now, shooting work samples and things like that. So that's currently what I'm working on now. But in terms of, I'm still working on stories and plan to work on stories my whole life that really amplify my family's millions of stories and my community's stories. So, yeah, that's kind of what I'm working on now. And I feel like it's not the last that we're going to see of, my dad and my uncle's stories, whether that's through a fiction scripted film in the future or it is through, a deeper look into their lives as brothers, even before this point. I definitely don't feel like it's the end of it. So
I don't think so either. Well, Mariah Barrera, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your work with us. I'm sure this won't be the last time we'll be seeing you. I wish you all the best.
thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. And if I could just encourage whoever's watching this, your personal stories do matter and take hold of those in any way you see fit.
Excellent. And thank you to our audience for joining us for this important and invigorating conversation. For more information about our upcoming film festival, please visit us at clevelandfilm.org. I'm Eric Siler. Thank you.